Okay. Hi, welcome everybody that's in person and online. This is going to be an informational meeting about stormwater management in Norwood. We'll give you a bit of information that the Stormwater Committee, the ad hoc Stormwater Committee has been working on the last 2 years. Jerry Hopcroft, I'm the vice chair of the committee. Jerry Hopcroft, he is in Maine, so he'll be presenting remotely, but hopefully he doesn't lose his connection and things go pretty smoothly. I think you can take it away, Jerry. I did not.
Okay, thanks, Heather. I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for coming out and signing in and trying to take a look at this. The Ad hoc Stormwater Utility Committee has been meeting for a little over a year, looking at a lot of information from a couple of consultants, CDM Smith and Stantec, who did some analyses of stormwater needs in the town. And we've been looking at how to adapt some of their recommendations, and more importantly, how to pay for them and over what time frame. So tonight, what we want to do is to provide as much information as possible to the residents of Norwood regarding where the Stormwater Committee work stands, the current needs, and the various methods for achieving those. With respect to stormwater management, it will be a 10-year process. We just simply have way too much work to be done to do it any shorter time frame. And I'll tell you that our town engineer is not really happy with 10 years and would probably like it a little bit longer. We're going to do it in 10 anyway. At least that's what we're going to be recommending. So the members of the committee, myself, I'm a civil environmental engineer, registered in the Commonwealth. I've been registered in engineering and civil engineering since about 1972 in all 6 New England states at one point in my career. Heather is also a resident of the town and is a civil engineer. Alan Slater is on the Finance Commission. Bob Donnelly is a selectman and also on the Capital Outlay Committee. Mark Ryan, the director of the DPW and town engineer, is a member of the committee. Holly Jones, conservation planner. Mike Rawson, the assistant town general manager. And we've had technical support and assistance from CDM Smith and Stantec. So that's the group that's been working to try to get this together. Here is fundamentally the problem that we're dealing with. If you look at the upper left of those 4 little pictures, you'll see that about 10% of what falls as rainfall onto natural ground cover, like undeveloped woodlands, that sort of thing, 10% is runoff. 40% evaporates, the other 50% infiltrates. That's really good. As soon as we start putting houses on and developing lots, even into lawns and gardens, we end up pushing that runoff up to 20%. And that reduces the evaporation and the infiltration. As soon as we get a dense population, more like the downtown area, we're going to start changing that to 30% of runoff. And then if we get to a really developed area, for example, along Route 1, we're looking at least 55%. If we look at a large parking lot, we're looking at 100% of what falls in that parking lot. And that's true of any impervious area, for that matter. So this is a fairly significant problem. We need to take as much of that out as we can. Right now, we estimate that the town of Norwood is probably in the 30 to 35% runoff rate. But the more development we do, and the more we waive a lot of the conditions within the planning department and land use and conservation commission regulations, the higher that number is going to go. Every drop that we use ends up going into the storm drains, and they're already overloaded in most of the town. As a point of perspective, or a note on perspective, when we talk about an area about the size of a standard um, soccer field, which is about 360 feet long, 225 feet wide, we're going to get over 12,622 gallons of water runoff in a quarter-inch rainstorm. 12,600 gallons in a quarter-inch rainstorm. When we make that pervious, even just the lawn, we're going to cut that to 1,260, 10% of what's coming off of that parking lot. So it makes a really, really big difference in how much water goes into the storm drains and how quickly. So impervious areas being increased with development is going to exacerbate the runoff, and waivers to land use planning and development projects also exacerbates the problem. There are some effects from all of that. We're going to have flooding, which we noticed the last time we had a major storm. That was about 3 years ago when the hospital was taken out. There was flooding underneath the bridge next to the public safety building. There was a lot of flooding right downtown from Washington Street all the way down to Broadway and significant areas around there. That also causes significant economic hardship. A lot of people had a lot of damage from that storm. They had to repair it. Some of that is insured, not necessarily all of it. People who lost jobs because the hospital closed, businesses were disrupted. That's a lot of economic hardship on individuals. People's homes were flooded, had some disruptions. A lot of property was destroyed, and there was a lot of infrastructure damage in the town as a result of all of that work. We noticed that the hospital was a clear example of the risks and the losses. This particular picture was taken after the first major flood with the public safety building, before the detention basin was built behind it, and before the drain was increased from the Shaw's parking lot area down towards the Hennessy Field connections. This is a very old picture in the 1980s. That is Bernie Cooper in the boat at the back, and you can see the other folks who have been identified. I don't swear to those identifications, but I'm pretty sure about Bernie. The rest, not exactly a positive of. In any event, there was a loss of livelihood for hundreds of people at the hospital and for some of those businesses, even if they only closed temporarily. There was a lot of loss of income for those places. Here's the latest one. Again, we can see down by Dunkin' Donuts, a lot of flooding within that same area. Cost of a new ambulance and police vehicles have occurred because without the hospital, we've had to make longer ambulance runs, typically over to Needham, and that's a lot of wear and tear, a lot of time on vehicles. Usually you need to send two vehicles to a call, so there can be a lot of extra costs associated with that. And we also have tax revenue losses from damaged property, the destruction of the hospital, and any businesses that close, at least temporarily. So there certainly are a lot of significant impacts from all of these storms that we're dealing with. Stormwater is actually regulated by the federal and the state governments, as well as by the town of Norwood. Federal requirements generally are through wetlands protection sorts of things. And the state has a stormwater standards handbook, which is about to be revised, by the way. The Conservation Commission regulations and the Planning Department regulations do require compliance with the stormwater standards and handbook. The Commonwealth also has what it calls an MS4 regulations. That stands for the Municipal Separate storm sewer system, which I will tell you is a bit of a misnomer because stormwater does not go in sewers. We have a separate system, so we have storm drains along with the sanitary sewers. We do not want stormwater in the sewers. So we do have drains. Nevertheless, that would be a pretty tough acronym, and so we go with the state with the storm sewer system. Now it controls things with a wetlands protection bylaw, some Board of Health regulations, subdivision regulations, the site plan review, zoning regulations, water resource protection districts, and our own MS4 bylaws and regulations. We do have the bylaw in place. The regulations still need to be done. The planning department is working on those. I hope we're going to see them fairly soon, but they are not yet fully in place. There are some that we need to follow from the state requirements, but we need to do our own as well. The current issue. Norwood has identified a bunch of engineering solutions to deal with stormwater challenges, and those started with the original Stantec report, which was done a little over 20 years ago, and we have not implemented most of it. We now have to figure out a way to fund and implement those leftover projects and a couple others that have come up since then. We need to provide some public information, provide input to, and get feedback from town residents. Tonight is the first of those meetings, and we do want your input on these. It is important to note that homeowners, businesses, and the towns all have responsibility for effective management of stormwater. It is not strictly a municipal problem. It's a big municipal problem, but we're not the only ones. As a town, we have to deal with it. Property owners and businesses do have a variety of options available to them and some responsibilities along with those. The first is to reduce impervious areas. If you don't need an impervious area, then take it up. Don't build them in the first place if you don't really need it. If you're doing a patio, it can be done with patio blocks that let the water flow through rather than off. You need to maintain appropriate, proper vegetative cover. Soil that does not have vegetation on it gets fairly hard when it gets dry. Then the runoff is almost like an impervious area until the soil has time to saturate. Sump pump discharges are a very big issue. We're not allowed to discharge directly into a storm drain in Norwood. And there's no reason to dump it onto the driveway, which runs down to the curb and then into the catch basin and directly into the storm drain. That also is a no-no, and it should be removed. Sump pump discharges should be discharging onto a lawn area that will not run off directly into the storm. Pay attention to runoff areas. Install erosion control measures so we don't create big gutters in the soil, which will direct water back into the streets. We need to pay attention to those things as we develop houses and as we do landscaping around the property. Town does have some responsibilities. We need to provide and maintain adequate storm drain systems. We need to use swales, detention basins, rain gardens, and other low impact development when we do municipal projects, when we do planning for development projects. Those things do reduce the runoff significantly. We need to finish our development and implementation of the regulatory structures. We minimize deviations and waivers for existing regulations. I think I've said that about 3 times already tonight. It is one of my mantras, and it's a very important one to try to keep going. There are a bunch of projects currently underway in the town. excuse me, the DPW does operate and maintain existing catch basin and storm drains through its annual operating budget. Cleaning of storm drains and catch basins is a continuous problem, and it does have a significant piece of the operating budget dedicated to it. New storm drains are built when the town has to do it through the capital budgeting process. When we have new developments, developers are required to install the catch basins and storm drains within that area to connect to the municipal system. But if we do it, it's a capital budget. We all know that capital budgets are tight every year. We have a very difficult time maintaining any kind of continuous flow. It's a very major problem. The original Meadowbrook study was the last one that we did, a major study. There were about 9 major projects within that study. Only a very small number of partial projects have been completed. The first one was that connection from the public safety building in the Shores down towards the Hennessy Field system. And there are a couple of smaller ones that were done over the years, but those are the only ones that have been done to date. We have currently planned the rest of those projects. I want to briefly run through what those projects entail, just so we have an idea of what actually is coming down. I know you can't read this slide, but what this does is show that we're looking at the planning and design and construction projects spaced out over 10 years through fiscal year 34. We're still in 23. We start 24 next July. This coming July. We'll be starting to put in some of these projects starting in the last half of this year in the planning and design. The Meadowbrook Channel project will be first. That one is going to be paid for through some ARPA money we have available to it. And that's going to increase the channel below Murphy Field. Hennessy Field discharges into a pipe under Murphy's Field that then goes underneath Pleasant Street and discharges into a channel that's the Meadowbrook has been channeled into. Further down, the channel on Meadowbrook was enlarged by the Corps of Engineers a few years ago with some work they did right at the Neponset River. So this Meadowbrook Channel project will increase the resilience of that channel, line it, and allow it to carry water more effectively into the area that the Corps did, and then into the Neponset River. We also have a very short project being planned at the same time to take care of a little problem on Dean Street, which has a serious risk in the vicinity of 53 Dean Street. It's not the biggest project we have going, but it's a pretty important one for the overall working of the subsequent projects that we'll be doing in that area. Once we get that channel done downstream, then we need to deal with the Hennessy Field and the Murphy Field project. We're going to have a presentation when I get done here from Stantec on both of these projects. But basically, the Hennessy Field project is a detention basin in the existing, primarily in the existing low area on the western edge. The reason for that is because we cannot discharge more into the Neponset River than we do now. And that's because it will cause downstream flooding on the Neponset. So we have to slow down the rate of water getting into the Neponset, and then we have to have big enough channels to optimize them. The Murphy Field work will take the water from the Hennessy Field holding basin and discharge it into the revised channel in Meadowbrook. Notice that the Murphy Field work will not disrupt the playing fields. Those pipes are outside the playing fields, between the playing field fences and Pleasant Street. And we'll see that a little bit later on as well. We'll then look to Guild Street. That picks up most of the runoff near and around the hospital site and the post office, and crosses under the road tracks at Guild Street and Broadway, and ultimately connects into the Hennessy Field system. Again, we're working from downstream, upstream to get the best impact. The Broadway and Manhattan Street system picks up the water generated northerly and easterly of Guild Street within the Meadowbrook drainage area, and conveys it also to Hennessy Field, and then to the Neponset River. Jacobson Drive is a little bit north of Dean Street and west of Pleasant Street. It's a low area development that does flood regularly. That will pick up the system there and tie it again back into the Guild Street system, then into the one that goes under the bridge, and then into the Hennessy Field structure. East Royal and Washington Street does the areas north of Washington Street and north of Walpole Street, up Winter Street. It brings all of that water down into the same system. So there's a lot of water that goes into that Hennessy Field, Murphy Field, Meadowbrook system. And we have a lot of work to do to make that work efficiently and effectively without flooding out people downstream on the Neponset River. One of the things we'll notice is the unfunded capital cost estimates for these projects, the design and the construction only, is over $40 million. That does not include inflation over the next 10 years, does not include debt service, does not include increases in operations and maintenance costs. So a lot of money coming down the road in the next 10 years to get these projects done. And that's why we have such a significant issue in trying to figure out how we're going to get that done and how we're going to fund it. What do we get for all that money? We get reduced flooding in the areas currently most susceptible to major inundation. The hospital is being built above grade without a basement this time. It is raised above all the water levels that occurred around it. That will not be a flooding issue again, but it could become isolated until we get these other projects done. The flooding we saw downtown will not be relieved until we get these projects done. The flooding in those other areas will not be relieved until we get these projects done. Will reduce the risk of public safety buildings from being isolated and inundated again. Minimize the risks for residences and businesses that have seen more frequent flooding, and there will be more frequent flooding as time goes on. We're looking to provide protection from projected storms for the next 75 years. Not all storms, but storms of the magnitude that we just recently experienced. Those storms will have bigger flows for the same design storm than we do now. Notice that all of this work will still not eliminate all flooding from all storms, or even fix all the known smaller flooding issues. So there will be more work and more projects coming down. We're in this fix now because we ignored a lot of all of these projects for the last 10 to 20 years. It is all coming back. Now we have to deal with it. And that's where we're at. We have to do. There are some ways to finance all of this. 3 of them are realistic, or at least realistic enough to be considered. The first is to continue financing all of these projects through the normal capital outlay process and the operating budget. You already know that's not going to work. We tried to do that already for the last 10 years. It hasn't worked out real well, as we've noticed recently. We're going to look at that again. That's going to be a very difficult thing to do without cutting way back for all the other municipal services that we provide. Same thing with the debt exclusion override. It impairs the ability to borrow, and it changes our rating for borrowing. The third alternative is assessment of a separate stormwater management fee, which would be associated with what we call an enterprise fund, similar to the way that we do our water billing now as a separate fee. It's not part of the Public Works Department fees. Our sewer system and our sewer fees are done the same way. The light department is done the same way. So we're looking at the option of creating a separate enterprise fund in order to provide a separate management fee. We do not yet know the order of magnitude of that fee. It's going to depend upon what we put into the fee in terms of capital funding, only capital funding plus O&M, capital funding plus O&M plus management. There are a lot of things that we have to sort out yet, and that's what the Stormwater Committee is going to be doing. We're looking at all of those options in concert with the DPW director, the Treasurer's Office, and the Board of Selectmen. The Capital Outlay Committee is also involved, and we're trying to figure out the most appropriate option for this particular study. The Treasurer's Office has been doing some analyses for us in trying to figure out what the financial impacts would be either on the town or on the individuals, depending on which of those options we end up doing. So it's not yet finalized. We will hope to have them finalized pretty quickly. The Stormwater Committee will continue to work with town staff to develop that. We will have more public information sessions for input on particular projects. And we do want to have very specific meetings when we get to specific projects in the future. So we'll be holding one, for example, very close to Hennessy Field in the near future. So we can talk about details on the Hennessy Field project and the Murphy Field project. And we intend at this point to try to notify everybody in that vicinity by mail of when that will be. We're also going to have that as an open public meeting, as will all our meetings be. They'll be advertised generally, but we do want to try to make sure that people most directly affected by projects going forward will get direct notification of an upcoming meeting that will directly affect them. We also want to return in the fall with a specific funding plan for town meeting. That's one of our key objectives going through the summer, and we hope to be able to achieve all of that going forward. We do plan to initiate general meetings in any event, and we will look for input from everyone that we can provide it. If you don't have an opportunity to do that tonight, don't be afraid to send a letter or an email to me. My email is on the town website, fhopcroft@norwoodmass.gov, or to Bob Donnelly, the selectman, will pass it on to us, or to Mike Rosen, the assistant town manager, will get us to us, or any of the members of the committee. We all do work together, and we do share information on all of these things. So with that, I'm going to turn this back to Heather. Heather, you can introduce the Hennessy Field project for us, and then we'll open it up to our general questions or comments once that's all done. So with that, if you could do that, I'm going to stop sharing, and you can pick that up with the Hennessy Field project.
Okay. Yeah, Heather, why don't you introduce Mark?
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so first, before we bring Stephanie, Mark Ryan is going to talk about the Hennessy Field project.
Thanks, Heather. Just quickly, before I introduce Stephanie Harrison from Stantec, who's done a great job with her firm on this project. I think most of you know what Meadowbrook is, but those who don't, Meadowbrook watershed is basically an area of town that drains to the Meadowbrook near Murphy Field off of Pleasant Street. It includes the hospital area, the public safety building, town hall, all of Norwood Center, and a lot of areas west of it. It's 1.5 square miles, very densely populated area. So those slides that Jerry Hopcroft was showing with some of the infiltration and everything, we're probably in an area. So we have a lot of stormwater to address in that watershed area. Back in 2004, a report was done by Basewap and Thorndike, and Jerry talked about that, and a lot of projects on there used to be done, close to $8.4 million worth of cost back then. And because of we just could not do that. We didn't do any of the projects. The project that was done when they built the police station was they connected the 4x8 culvert in the Shaw's parking lot to the detention behind the public safety building. That has helped quite a bit. Other than that, nothing else was done on this project. So fast forward to June 28th of 2020, we all know the event we all experienced here. And we resurrected the study of the Meadowbrook. We saw the impact of the storm on our downtown. The hospital was flooded. We have not just in those type of real significant downpour. East Street, near Broadway gets closed down. Guile Street under the railroad bridge gets shut down. East Vernon and Central Street gets shut down. Manhattan Street under the railroad bridge gets shut down. These are all public safety issues that we are trying to address in this recommendations that Stephanie's going to talk a little bit about coming up. But now those projects are well over $37 million. By not doing anything, things have just gotten that more expensive, and we've caused a lot of damage along the way by ignoring it. So I just want to introduce Stephanie. She's going to go through a couple of projects we're working on now. One, the Meadowbrook Channel, as Jerry talked about. That's our first project to help out the flow in the channel there so it can perform better. And then the next project after that would be the Hennessy Field Storage Basin, which was recommended back in 2004. It was recommended back in 1980, and then again it was recommended in 2022. So it's a natural fit for the drainage system, because that's where the drainage eventually flows through there now. So it's quite an undertaking, but it's something that we need to get done if we really want to seriously address the flooding going on in the Meadowbrook area. So with that, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Harrison from Stantec.
I think we'll do questions at the end.
Can I ask if the folks online can hear me if I'm not holding the mic?
Jerry, or can somebody confirm if they can hear Stephanie?
I got it okay here.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. If there's a problem with sound, just let me know, and I'm happy to switch over to the mic. So my name is Stephanie Harrison. I work with Stantec, an engineering firm. Before I worked with Stantec in Massachusetts, I worked as a program manager at the city of San Francisco dealing with their stormwater issues. And I just want to let you guys know, town of Norwood, you guys are not like every municipality everywhere is facing similar issues. This stormwater drain system is old. It was built primarily in the 1800s to early 1900s. And the pipes are the pipes. The town has changed a lot, right? And so it's not uncommon for municipalities to be facing these situations right now. The 2020 storm event was a huge wake-up call, I think, just to recognize how severe flooding can be. When we talk about stormwater, there's a lot of different aspects to managing stormwater. There's, you know, managing small storms and water quality, and there's also flooding. And so when we talk about flooding, we have to, oh, I think
Oh, okay.
we'll see. We'll
Okay.
see. Yeah, I'll see if I need it. I think the slides are simple enough. Thank you. When we talk about flooding, we're usually talking about big storms. And so what you need to carry water in a big storm is big infrastructure. And that's why it ends up being such a costly component of the stormwater picture. So, oh, the other thing I wanted to say, just reacting to things that I'm hearing tonight, is that like a lot of other municipalities are looking at the same financing options that were presented tonight. Stormwater management fees are just being evaluated everywhere. The city of San Francisco is currently implementing one. They just pilot tested it and they're working towards implementation. That's my knowledge base, but now I'm out here and working with other municipalities who are also looking at stormwater management fees. So it's not, I just want you to know that the town of Norwood is not in a unique situation here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about the study that we did in the 2020 to 2021 timeframe. Sorry, 2021 to 2022 timeframe, how we got to the recommendations that we got to, and then I'm going to just case study two of the projects, the Meadowbrook and the Hennessy Field. So,
Do you want to slide it in?
yeah,
Okay. Okay. To the right, go slowly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So, as Mark mentioned, there was the modeling study that was done in 2004, and we updated it in 2021. I know there's a lot of civil engineers in the room, but I'll try to simplify this as much as I can. The analysis was based on a computer model that looks at when rain falls on the ground, what happens to that rain? How does it get into the pipes? How does it run over the surface? Where can it not get into the pipes and maybe pool? And it's using best available technology to represent the existing drain pipe network and also the ground surface on top of the pipe network. And so what you put into the model, so once you build the model with all the pipes and the ground surface, then you make it rain. And you look at different storm events, and then what the model tells you is how does the pipe and the flooding and the stormwater runoff respond to those different rain events. So it's in concept, it's basic. We've modeled what's happening on the surface and underground. We've applied rain and look at what happens flood-wise and flow-wise in the drain network. So after we built the model, we calibrated the model, which means we collected rainfall data and pipe flow data for a 3-month period. This is the rain gauge that was installed on top of the library. And this is one of the flow meters that was installed in Murphy Field, just to give you a sense of what it looks like. And then what you do is you compare what the model simulates with the actual rainfall and what actually flowed through the pipes. And you're trying to get the model to match actual conditions. And so here you can see an example of the red being what's measured in the flow meter and the blue being what our model simulates with the same rainfall dropping onto the town. And you want these to match up. I'm of course showing you the best example. They did not all look like this, but that shows you that your model is essentially working, that it's correctly simulating what your system would do. So with this study, and so we did update the 2004 study, but by and large, the drain system is the drain system, right? And the main branches of the drain system are in the same location. So a lot of the projects that came out of this were very similar to what was in 2004, but the difference being that this study also looked at rain events considering climate change, right? Because you don't want to build something and have it be obsolete in 10 or 20 years. And we know a lot more about climate change today than we did in 2004. So the storms that we designed for in this analysis were a little bit bigger because that's what we're expecting with climate change. So we have a design storm, which is a 2070, projected to the year 2070, 10-year rain event, which doesn't mean it happens once every 10 years, but over a long-term period, you can expect that the frequency of returning would be 1 in 10 years. Now it could happen 2 years in a row. Like it's like rolling a dice, right? You have a probability 1 in 6 of rolling a 6, but you could roll 2 6s in a row. So this doesn't tell you how often it happens. It just tells you the probability of it happening. And then we evaluate how much flooding occurs in key neighborhoods that Mark was talking about. So then when we look at the flooding on the ground that comes out of the model in that event, then we try to identify what can we do with the pipes to convey water away from those neighborhoods more quickly. So we modify the pipes in the model, say we upsize one of the main branches of the sewer in the model, and then run it again and see, does the water clear out of the neighborhood more quickly? Does the flooding go down with the same design storm? And then look at how flooding changes. So we did this many, many, many times with the computer model. So the study objectives were to build and calibrate that model, and then look at how we can minimize flooding in those key neighborhoods and do not increase peak flows to the Neponset River, because we can't just dump more water in the river at the peak of the rainstorm. And that's not being a good steward of the Neponset River watershed, because if everybody's doing that, then there's going to exacerbate the flooding downstream in the Neponset River and just shift the problem downstream. So we came up with these projects that were spoken about earlier, that Jerry talked about earlier. He talked about each of these red rectangles as a project. And you can see they kind of follow the main branches of the system through Hennessy Field, coming from the south, and then down to Murphy Field here, down to the Neponset River, and down to Meadowbrook, which then flows into the Neponset River. So by its nature, when you take flooding off the street and you put it in a pipe, to the extent possible, you obviously want to infiltrate it. But when it's a big storm, like a 10-year storm event, there's a lot of water. So when you put it in a pipe, it moves away from the neighborhood, but it moves downstream faster. And so because we can't just dump it all into the Neponset River at a much higher rate of flow, the town needs a place to store the water so that we're not increasing peak flows into the Neponset River. And so Hennessy Field, the reason it keeps coming up study after study is because it's right here, and it's so ideally located for draining the system and having a place to store water, that it's just and it's town land, right? That it's just the natural place for a project like this. So I'm going to go through a quick description of Meadowbrook, and then I'll take a minute longer on Hennessy Field. So this is the Meadowbrook restoration. Meadowbrook, here's Murphy Field right here, and here's Hennessy Field. So here's the Murphy Field ball fields, and then there's a culvert under here, and then the culvert dumps out into the head of Meadowbrook, and it comes down to 6th Street, and it goes down to Dean Street, and it goes down to the Neponset River. This, from here downward, was already improved in the 1990s, I believe, by the Army Corps of Engineers. But this section was not touched. So this section is effectively a little bit of a bottleneck in that it's narrower, and frankly, it's kind of fallen into disrepair, because there's, well, you can see right here, this is Meadowbrook flowing this way. And there's tree debris and, accumulated sediment, and there's banks that are undercut. And so there's improvements that we need to make to this to make this a channel that is a functional part of the drainage system. So the objective is to stabilize the banks and improve conveyance. And we looked at an Army Corps approach, which would be like 10-foot wide base, 2-to-1 slope channels, all concrete. And it didn't feel right for the town. So in our discussions with the town, so we're looking at localized treatments where when we see a severely undercut bank like this, we might cut it back a little bit, clear the trees that are hanging on by one thread, and do some stabilization of that bank, but maybe not a uniform design all the way down the channel. The other project I'm going to spend a little more time on is the Hennessy Field stormwater storage. So the project area is Hennessy Field. The objective is to store and infiltrate stormwater in large storms. And the project concept is there's a large pipe that currently flows through Hennessy Field. It would be to daylight that pipe and essentially create a creek that is, so right now the stormwater system, the drain system often has a little trickle in it just from groundwater that's coming in over time. So maybe a little trickle in here, but in a storm event, it would convey as a brook would. But then to use the slope of this property, it's really high uphill down here and it slopes down to the ball field, to use the slope and cut it in a little bit and build it up a little bit here. We'll get into that, and create a little bit more of a wide swimming pool, a wide spot in the line, so that when there is a big storm, this can fill and buffer and prevent too much flow from going to Meadowbrook to the Neponset River. this was also seen as an opportunity to add recreational amenities. So we'll talk a little bit about that. If we're going to do a big, resurfacing project here and make it a natural landscape, there's a lot of opportunity for education, for recreation, for gathering spaces, things like that to improve the property's use to the community. So this is the existing site with the existing trails shown. I'm going to go through a series of maps here. And this is the proposed regrading. So each of these lines is a depth. So there's a flat bottom here, a step up. It's not quite like chunky like a staircase, but this is what civil engineering drawings look like. So it sort of like gradually rises up, and then you've got some steeper slopes, and then you've got a trail all the way around the top. You can see the berm comes up and down here. This is kind of holding the water back here. So that's the regrade, and it looks ugly because this is maybe what it would look like in the middle of construction, but then it would be replanted with recreational features added. So what does that look like? Here's the cross street entrance, and here's the Lenox Ave entrance. We're talking about having a relatively flat recreational trail all along the basin edge. That trail would connect into existing trails that are already on the site. We're talking about something like a pollinator garden, some habitat here that could improve pollination. This would be a berm with a spillway and some landscaping, some seasonal landscaping at the entrance here. Here's the daylighted stormwater channel and the connection to the pipes underground that go out to Meadow Brook. And then this whole dark green area is the basin for stormwater storage and infiltration. So maybe if we had a 10-year storm, it might fill it up. If we had a 2-year storm, it might overtop this daylighted channel, but it would be in a natural landscape and be able to infiltrate over time.
So, excuse me, would the green area be like a bowl?
Let me show you some pictures of it.
Okay.
Some visualizations. So these are just some representative plantings for native meadow and hillside, for the pollinator habitat, for the basin bottom. If there are any landscape architects in the room who are interested in what the possibilities are. So this is a little bit more of what it could look like. So this is an aerial photo that was taken of the site as it is today. And what we did was we put those contours of that basin into a ground model and use Google Earth backdrop, a drone photography, and just put the contours on to see what would it look like if it were cleared out and landscaped. So that's an example from the ball field looking north. The next slide is from the north looking south down onto the ball field of what this could look like. This is the cross street entrance as it exists today at the top of the park. And we could do an entrance that is like a little hole in the trees, right? Or something that's a little bit more like a vista, depending on what the town and those neighbors want to see. So there's options. And then this is the Lenox Avenue. So this is the Lenox Avenue entrance. So here's the ball field on the right. And right now it's kind of an overgrown wooded property. Here's the trash can and the sign that are currently the entrance. And what you see with the clearing is that, you would see the berm here and maybe some landscaping, but we are hoping to add some programming, some educational materials, and a really nice space for recreation. But does that give you a sense of what you're asking? What would it look like? Maybe something like that?
Right now, it's a lot of ledge.
It is a lot of ledge. So this was a conceptual study. This is not a designed project. And so one of the challenges that we face when we do conceptual, even a cost estimate, for example, is you have to make a lot of assumptions about what you think you will encounter in the design process. There would definitely be an effort to survey the whole property, understand what's to be removed and where, and how much ledge is impacted, because that's much harder to excavate. But we didn't have that detailed information at this very early time in the process to be able to make those specific. We did try if I go back to here, back to one of these, there's a lot, you can even see it in the Google Earth here. There's up the hill, there's a little mound up here that has a lot of ledge in it that we've seen just walking on these trails. So we tried to avoid that. Like in an ideal world, we'd use the whole property to get more storage, right? But we tried to sort of be practical and avoid those areas, but we also know that there's ledge throughout, so that is a consideration in design. Here's a shot from the basin interior. This is right at that pollinator garden where the trails fork, and then this joins up with the existing trail. And this is just, you know, a sample of what a pollinator garden could look like, with some educational boards about pollinators and habitats and stormwater infiltration. And then this is up at the top at Cross Street, when you're standing on top of the daylighted stormwater creek, if you will, the daylighted stormwater pipe. You might be looking at this view of the basin. There's the berm at the bottom to hold the water. So just a couple of snapshots to give examples of the vision of the project, because this one is probably one of the more critical pieces of the stormwater system, and also one of the more expensive pieces of the stormwater system. So happy to take questions.
Can we do the microphone for questions?
Oh, well, just for the.
Just for you,
I was really interested in the model that you made, the theoretical model. Did you ever rerun the model with the changes that you proposed? And in that model, put in the characteristics of the storm that basically took out the Norwood Hospital.
The storm that took out the Norwood Hospital was an astronomical event.
Yeah, it was 1 in 100 years, I believe.
Right. So there's different ways of measuring a storm, but 1 in 100 would be the minimum size of it, right? 1 in 200, depending on which rain gauge you're looking at or what duration of time you're studying, like the peak of the storm versus the whole storm event. We have to run 100-year storms for FEMA analyses on the brook anyway. So we have those runs, but I can promise that they're not going to solve the flooding issues that we're experiencing in those storms. It would just provide extra conveyance.
So to follow that up, do you run a sequence of storms? So you can propose, you can predict what changes will mitigate, meaning today's status, right? You probably get flooding with a 2 or 3 inch storm. I don't know. I don't know the specifics of, I don't even know the specifics of status regarding what the extent of a storm needs to be before you get flooding. But I'm sure that data is available.
Yeah, so we ran, it's been a while since we did this study, and we do these studies for a lot of municipalities, but I believe we ran, I know we ran a 5-year and a 2-year. We might have also run a 1-year storm. So you look at the changes incrementally over different size storm events that the model would predict. Yeah, but we don't typically go beyond, like, say, a 10-year design storm, because it's just, as the rain amount gets larger and larger, the infrastructure that you need to manage that amount of rain gets exponentially bigger. And so it's impossible to design. It's a little bit of a balancing act, and a 10-year design storm is a pretty common benchmark. 5-year or 10-year is a pretty common benchmark for urban systems like this. And so we don't typically spend a lot of time on larger events, just recognizing that's kind of an act of nature, and there's not a feasible way to prevent flooding in those large events.
And so I think it's important for people to understand that.
Yes.
That if you spend $40 million and a 100-year storm comes along,
Yeah.
expect flooding.
That's an excellent point. I mean, low-lying areas are low-lying areas, right? And the water, it's just the law of physics. The water is always going to go downhill, and it's always going to go to a low-lying area like the underpasses in Haunt Street and Giles Street. Those are always going to be the first places, if there's extra water, to just act like a bathtub. And so you design your systems to move water away in a design storm, but there will always be a bigger event than your design storm. Like, that's a certainty. And so water will always go back to those low-lying neighborhoods, whether they're the underpasses or the neighborhoods.
And a lot of water could be associated with hurricanes. And we haven't had a hurricane in this region for a long time.
Yeah.
Right? But
Yep.
this will not mitigate anything
It
like
doesn't,
that.
yeah, it does not eliminate flooding.
Okay, thank you. I love your modeling.
I just wanted to share, because I think this is related to your question, that the town has been also engaged in a regional flood modeling project with the Neponset River Watershed Association and our local planning, or regional planning organization, MAPC, and all of the other towns in our watershed. And one of the models that they did run was what happens not just when you get a 10-year design storm, but when you get 2 10-year design storms back to back to back. And it's much less, it's much broader scale than this study that the town had done for this much smaller watershed. But we will be having another meeting about regional flooding on June 15th with the Neponset River Watershed Association. And they developed a GIS model. So it's an online map where you can put in sort of different storms and different parameters and see the extent of flooding in a region that would happen under those different parameters. So I think they'll be sharing that tool at that meeting on June 15th, and it should be pretty interesting. So I encourage folks, if you're interested, to also come out to that.
Yeah, those regional models, Stantec worked on that for the Mystic River watershed, and there was one for the Charles River watershed and now one for the Neponset River watershed. So we're all aware of these studies. The challenge when you go to a regional scale is that you've got such a big watershed, right? That you can't put in all the pipes that you saw, like those the blue pipes that were in, that I showed you from the Meadowbrook watershed model. You wouldn't have all of those in a regional model because the computational time to run the hydraulics for each of those elements is so much greater when you put it on a regional scale. So it tends to be much more parsed down. You wouldn't necessarily get the neighborhood resolution that you would get at a town-wide level, but it gives you a sense for what are the possibilities on the town scale, on the regional scale, and how much worse do things get. Yeah.
If you're interested in attending that meeting with the regional modeling study, you can go to neponset.org and register that way.
Yeah. And I would add too that we're looking not just at the Meadowbrook solutions to flooding, but that study was looking at regional solutions and sort of modeling what happens if we require extremely strict businesses to hold 5 inches of water on their site, or what happens if we use all of our ponds in our region to store several feet of water at every flood. What happens if we buy back land and rebuild wetlands where they were filled? And how much does each solution get us, and how feasible is that throughout the region? And so those are some of the things. The Meadowbrook is very much the priority for the town, but it's sort of the need, but it's not going to fix everything. And so we're looking at every tool in the toolbox as well in the next 50 years of what we're going to need to do to be prepared.
You know, I thought was interesting in this proposal. I'm sorry. This proposal, I think one of the trade-offs was what happens to the wildlife when you clear that whole area.
Yeah.
And is anybody addressing that?
So that would certainly be addressed through normal permitting channels, but there would be a clearing of the habitat that's there right now, which is sort of an overgrown, I don't know, I don't want to.
Not a lot of value to those trees. They're problematic. We got 2 sewer lines going through there, a drain line. They're constantly falling and creating havoc with everything. And Yeah, there is a little detriment there that you're gonna take down those trees, but we're gonna restore with native trees and all the different native type of flowers and pollinators. So I think the payback will be a much higher value area.
And it would still be creation of habitat, right? An open space. It's not like we're creating a parking lot, right?
Right.
So it would just be a trade of one type of habitat for a different type of habitat.
It's different.
Yeah.
What's the amount?
And there is a benefit as well to the aquatic habitat from daylighting that portion of the drainage system. So, you know, not only might the deer and the bunnies who are living there now, they have access to a stream without having to cross down to 6th Street, but that water is now getting oxygenated. It's getting exposed to the sun, and that we see dramatic improvements in water quality when we are able to take water out of pipes and surround it with, even if it's grass instead of woods, you know, surround it with vegetation that can help filter, help connect it back to the groundwater.
Are there any questions online?
I don't see any, no hands up or.
I just want to make a comment. The presentation is excellent, and I absolutely know that we need to do something because nothing's not an answer. Mother Nature's going to have her way. And there is no perfection in the 100-year storms, the 100-year storm. But in all of this work, which I understand is necessary, I really wanted to come in person, and Holly Jones is going to know what I'm going to say. I'm always advocating for District 5, where I live on Pentecost Street. And we have hundreds of thousands of gallons of water that come off Mill Pond, off near St. Timothy Church and Waller Street. And there's an earthen dam up there. It's private and it's labeled high risk. I don't know if it's been inspected in the last few years. But the amount of water that came down to the dam, it's called the Martin Curran Dam across from Big Y. The flow was incredible. The brook across the street from me breached. It was like a pond across the street from me. The end of my street, Norwood Commerce Center, which did have a cease and desist a couple of years ago, and new owners and investors, they're doing a phenomenal job of restoring that mill. And that was so severely flooded when the hospital flooded, that event. You normally could drive around the whole Norwood Commerce Center, you couldn't get through. The flood was really huge. So in addition to stormwater drain, have you looked at the impact downstream from St. Tim's, down Nickel Street, down to the Lower Pond, down to Enterprise Street, down to the Norwood Commerce Center, and then it flows down to South Norwood to the Ponson River. So you want to talk about, you know, P flows to the river. It's gushing down. It's emanating from even higher than the Willow Pond, because I know it's connected even further up at Petty's Pond. I know the whole story, but I just feel that the conversations fell apart with the 85 landowners of that earthen dam, and I don't know if it's going anywhere since in terms of ensuring that the next several decades, if this earthen dam gets fixed, because if that someday breaches, then the dam across the street from Big Y on Route 1A will not be able to handle it. And there was an engineer's report on that too. I've been involved in this for a long time. I've been to my house for 41 years. I know my neighborhood. And I was registered with them for my husband registered. He gave input on our street months ago. They were doing like neighborhood pockets because we know our neighborhood's the best. And we're already registered for that meeting. And I just feel that we need to keep talking about our neck of the woods and the Norwood Commerce Center at the end of my street. And now it has 112 new condos to the left of it. So it's not okay to not address it, because the end of my street still gets a lot of water. And the brook did breach, you know, pretty much all the way. I have pictures of it, we can show you. And I don't feel that this has been taken necessarily into this conversation. We also get a lot of downstream water. Once you hit Chapel Street, it's downhill going south, and the water comes down on Columbine and Woodbine. It all comes down that way towards Endicott. We are just flooded. It's a river coming off of 1A and then back. My neighbors have stories. So I don't really feel our neck of the woods is included in this. Just saying.
So a couple things were happening tonight. We were talking about stormwater, how we have to start addressing it townwide. Okay, in projects, neighborhoods like you're mentioning, certainly going to be looked at. Right now, we just wanted to start putting it out that a stormwater utility fee or some other mechanism is going to have to be put into effect to address some of the stormwater projects coming down the road. And one of those projects coming down the road is what we just showed you tonight, because we have a study. And this is in print and it's been analyzed, and so that's one of them. But certainly any other ones that we know that is an issue, and how do we address it? I know Holly's been dealing with the dam people, I think, a little bit, right? The Willett Pond Dam, they've been coming in front of the,
speak about that.
yeah, the commission and the commission and Holly are on top of it to make sure that it's functioning properly. But we're not ignoring parts of town. This is just one project out of this whole utility fee that we may, or debt service, or whatever way we fund it, it's going to be addressed. So we're not ignoring areas of town.
Yeah, so in that watershed, right, I think one thing we really as a town have to get stormwater management sort of into our blood and into everything that we're doing, both for Meadowbrook watershed and all the other watersheds in town. In the Hosbrook watershed, we are prioritizing as one of the top emergency management tasks for the town, repairs to Willett Pond Dam, and working with those dam owners. The Conservation Commission several months ago permitted the first step of that, which is repairs to the low-level outlets, and they are working with an engineering firm to do designs for the full repair as well as their routine required inspections. The Conservation Commission downstream of Willett Pond also has completed repairs to, or not completed repairs, completed design for repairs, minor repairs to Ellis Pond Dam. So we have an unseated gate there in the center gate, and the Conservation Commission will be permitting those repairs on the 21st of this month and going to the Capital Outlay Committee for the money for that for next year. And that's a significantly smaller repair than what's required for Meadowbrook. So it is something that's much easier to go to the Capital Outlay, where we're asking for an order of $150,000 instead of tens of millions of dollars. You know, additionally, in cause, we are working on the Bernie Cooper Park to try and hold as much stormwater there as we can as well. And I know that's downstream of you, but I fully agree with you that every chance we have to take it, wherever it is in town, to control stormwater and to manage our risk with our dams and our ponds. Oh, and I should add also, we just signed a contract today for updates to our hazard mitigation planning, which will focus heavily on those dams. So we'll be starting that planning process this summer and fall as well. So another thing to keep your eye on moving forward.
Well, since it's been brought up a few times, how when you talk about storage management fee, what's like the base unit of measure, or how do you bill for something like that as far as that goes? I mean, I don't know. Is it by square footage of lots property owners have? If it's a 10,000 square foot lot, you have to bill it X dollars per square foot or something like that, or is that, I mean, how does that all work out? Because we're talking about it, but it's just a name, not really how we're going to bill it and where it hits the average household.
Right. I'm just going to take this one.
So in addition to the
work that Stantec is doing, we've also had the guidance of CDM Smith, looking at modeling for what the revenue requirement would be and how you would do a fee structure if we were to go with a fee structure. So a good example might be looking at the town of Dedham, which initially, as just recently, put forward a fee. And basically the unit is usually a measurement of impervious surfaces associated with properties, roofs and driveways. So, you know, from GIS technology, you can do a calculation on businesses and residences to estimate, or at least get some pretty good definition around what is the amount of impervious surface associated with that property. And your fees can then be scaled, if you will, to reflect paying more if you have more impervious surfaces. So that seems to be one of the general best practices for associating with stormwater using impervious surfaces.
I'm just thinking in terms of something that would be for a future thing, that we're talking about impervious surfaces, and Tony mentioned about the big wide area. I know that there is some kind of like an asphalt type of thing that is permeable, and they're using it on highways in some areas and stuff like that. I don't know if it's worth it. Like, would you be able to get enough water through it to at least lessen the amount of water that goes into some of these flood areas? And is it something that you could require, or you were talking about, you know, adding like some kind of a, you know, that if it's impermeable and stuff like that, if you could add some kind of a fee or a tax or something on it? But is it something, I don't know if you're even aware of the kind of material I'm talking about, but.
Yep, no, I am.
And again, I don't even know if the cost is more than what it would be worth. I don't know.
Jerry, do you want to take that?
Yes, I think that's actually a very good question. And indeed, we are very well aware of it. There are lots of products like that that can be done for driveways or for patios, for other types of areas. Those are things that the homeowner should be looking at rather than the municipality, except for municipal projects. In those cases, yeah, we definitely should be looking at those sorts of things. That's part of the LID or low impact development stuff that I was mentioning.
Any other questions?
I mean, can I just touch on it quickly? So when you talk about pervious pavement on highways, basically on highways, it's called open graded asphalt, and it lets the water go in and get off the surface, and so you're not having that sheen on the road, but then it drains off to the side of the road. It doesn't necessarily go in. But there are porous pavement that you see in parking lots where it's quite involved, where you're digging down 2, 3, 4 feet, bringing in, you know, crushed stone and everything, and then paving over it with a pervious asphalt or whatever material, and the water does go down. It is very, very, very expensive. But back to your point about the big Y, any like new development, they got to provide drainage calculations, very involved, showing that whatever the rate of runoff water leaving that site in the existing condition, it's going to be increased when you add roofs and pavement. So they have to mitigate that. So a lot of times you'll see detention basins, more so now because land is a premium. You see underground storage structures put in, and porous pavement is another option they could use. So all those types of ways to handle the runoff are available to them, and you know, we try to have them implemented any of these development projects.
So as an example, if anyone goes by the Space Center anytime soon, they are building a new parking lot on the other side of the building from the big main parking lot. And that new parking lot is being built with porous pavement.
Oh, wow.
All right, I think that's all the questions we have in the room. Anybody online, last chance?
Thanks everybody for coming. I very much appreciate it. Don't forget to let us know if you think of any other questions. We do want all the info we can get. It'll help out us season immensely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. Thank you, Jerry.